The first time I held the letter, the paper felt like stolen things feel in your hands, heavy, accusatory, vibrating with a wrongness that seeps into your skin. It was cream-colored, thick, the kind of paper meant for wedding invitations and legal documents, not for the delicate ruin it was meant to cause. Alara had left it on my pillow, a silent, weighty ghost in our sunlit apartment. Her scent, jasmine and sleep, still clung to the sheets, but this letter, smelled of another woman's perfume, something older, sharper, like chilled lilies and regret. Her mother's scent. My name was written on the front in an elegant, slanted script. Not a crease, not a smudge. It was perfect, like the woman who wrote it. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to burn it, to watch the flames turn her poisonous words into harmless, floating ash. But the curiosity was a hook in my gut, pulling me open. I slid my thumb under the flap, the seal giving way with a soft, definitive tear. The sound was like a thread snapping. It began not with a greeting, but a statement. I know you believe you love my daughter. The words didn't feel read. They felt implanted directly into the most vulnerable parts of my mind. It was a masterwork of manipulation, a scalpel disguised as a pen. It spoke of Alara's potential, her brilliant future as a concert cellist, a future that was apparently incompatible with the distraction of our intense friendship. It mentioned a prestigious, last-minute audition in Vienna, a position in an orchestra she'd dreamed of since she was a girl, an opportunity that had, miraculously, just opened up. All she had to do was leave immediately. For a year. The letter didn't threaten, not outright. It didn't need to. It simply laid out a better, brighter, more acceptable version of Alara's life, a version in which I was a faint, smudged pencil mark in the margin, easily erased. It picked apart my existence with terrifying precision, my job as a freelance illustrator, my bohemian lifestyle, my lack of a stable, traditional framework to offer her daughter. It knew about the small, persistent anxiety that lived in my chest, the one that whispered I wasn't enough, that our love was too beautiful a thing to be built on the shaky foundation of me. Her mother had given that anxiety a voice, a lexicon, a letterhead. The worst part was the final paragraph. A love that is real, it stated, can endure any distance, any test. If what you have is genuine, a year apart will only strengthen it. But if it is, as I suspect, a passing infatuation born of proximity, then you will be doing her a greater service by letting her go than by clinging on. It was a checkmate in ink. To fight it would be to admit my love was weak. To accept it would be to hand her the scalpel and bare my own throat. I sat there for a long time, the paper a cold weight in my lap. The sun shifted across the floorboards, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. In this light, our apartment was a cathedral of small joys. Alara's cello case leaning against the bookshelf, a stack of my art books on the coffee table, 2 mugs sitting side by side in the sink. It all looked so fragile suddenly, a diorama of a happiness that could be packed away, dismantled by a single sheet of cream-colored paper. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, waiting for the fall. I could still feel the phantom pressure of Alara's head on my shoulder from this morning, the soft brush of her lips against my temple before she left for her rehearsal. Now, those memories felt like exhibits in a case that was already closed. I thought of the small, hidden world we had built within these walls, a world her mother had never seen but was now systematically destroying from a distance. The specific way Alara hummed when she made coffee, the particular drawer where we kept our tangled collection of charging cables, the faint pencil mark on the door frame where we'd measured our height against each other in a fit of silly laughter. All of it felt suddenly, terribly temporary. I had always been good at reading the maps of people, the subtle topography of a frown, the cartography of a hesitant smile. But Ilara was a continent I never believed I'd get to explore. I met her at a gallery showing for a friend, a cacophony of wine glasses and pretentious laughter. I was hiding near a large, angry-looking sculpture made of welded scrap metal, trying to look thoughtfully engaged instead of socially paralyzed. And then I saw her across the room, a pocket of stillness. She was listening to my friend drone on about his inspiration, her head tilted, her expression one of such genuine, profound attention that it felt like a physical touch. She had dark hair that fell in a soft wave over one shoulder, and eyes the color of a twilight sky, a deep, mysterious gray blue. Our eyes met for a second, just a flicker, and a jolt went through me, a sudden, shocking sense of recognition, as if I'd been waiting my whole life for that exact shade of blue-gray to find me in a crowd. I looked away immediately, my heart hammering a ridiculous rhythm against my ribs. When I dared to glance back, she was still looking at me, a small, curious smile playing on her lips. She found me later, by the refreshment table, a disastrous no-man's land of spilled punch and crumbling crackers. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me, her arm brushing mine, and reached for a napkin. The simple, accidental contact was a brand. My skin sang with it. She pointed to a small, framed sketch I'd done, a study of hands. "That's my favorite," she said, and her voice was lower than I'd expected, a cello's note-given sound. "You can see the life in them, the story." That was all it took. For years of art school, and my entire portfolio was validated by the timbre of her voice. We talked for an hour, a conversation that felt less like an exchange of words and more like the slow, sure intertwining of two roots searching for the same source of water. I learned she was a musician. She learned I saw the world in lines and colors. When she finally had to leave, she didn't ask for my number. Instead, she took my hand, turned it palm up, and with a pen pulled from her purse, wrote her digits along my lifeline. The ink was a dark, bold blue. I walked home with my fist clenched, terrified of smudging it, of losing the proof that she was real. Our first date was a walk in the park that turned into a whole day. We shared a picnic of overpriced sandwiches from a deli, and she told me about the first time she held a cello, how it felt bigger than she was, a wooden whale she was determined to make sing. I told her about the first time I realized I could draw the world not as it was, but as I felt it to be. We lay on the grass, and she pointed out cloud shapes, but I was only looking at the shape of her lips, the elegant line of her throat. When her finger accidentally brushed against mine as she reached for a grape, a spark, tangible and warm, jumped between our skin. We both fell silent, the air around us suddenly charged with the unspoken question of what would happen next. Our first kiss happened a week later in the rain under the flickering neon sign of a closed laundromat. We'd been walking for hours, talking about everything and nothing, the city glowing around us in the wet, dark night. We stopped under the awning, sheltering from a sudden downpour. Water dripped from the ends of her hair, and I remember thinking I had never seen anything so beautiful. She reached out and brushed a stray droplet from my cheek, her thumb lingering on my skin. Her gaze dropped to my lips, and the world shrank to the space between our bodies, to the sound of the rain and our shared, shaky breaths. She leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I met her halfway. That first kiss was not a gentle thing. It was a confession, a release, a collision of two lonely stars finally finding their orbit. It tasted of rain and hope and the faint, metallic tang of the city air. Her lips were soft but sure, and when her hands came up to cradle my face, I felt something hard and guarded in me shatter, flooding my chest with a warmth so intense it was almost painful. We broke apart, foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified and exhilarated me, that my life had irrevocably changed course. We kissed again, slower this time, a deep, exploring kiss that mapped the future in the language of touch. My hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer until our bodies were aligned, the entire length of her pressed against me. I could feel the frantic beat of her heart through our coats, a rhythm that matched my own. It was in that moment, soaked and breathless under a flickering sign, that I understood the word yearning was not just an emotion, but a physical state of being. The first time I stayed the night at her place, I was a nervous wreck. It wasn't about the intimacy, the physical act. It was about the vulnerability of being seen, truly seen, in the soft, unguarded hours of the morning. Her bedroom was sparse, dominated by the cello in its stand and a large window that looked out over the city lights. It felt like her sanctuary. We undressed each other with a reverence that left me breathless, the streetlights casting long, dramatic shadows across our skin. There was no rush. Her hands were everywhere, learning me, her touch a question and an answer all at once. When her fingers finally traced the sensitive skin of my stomach, dipping lower, my whole body arched into her, a silent plea. She whispered my name, a question, and I could only nod, my voice lost in the overwhelming sensation of being unraveled by her. She moved over me, her hair a dark curtain around our faces, and when we finally joined, it was with a gasp that was both hers and mine. It was less about passion and more about completion, a puzzle clicking into place. I remember clutching at her back, my fingers pressing into the firm muscles there, as waves of pleasure, so profound they felt like grief, washed through me. She held me through it, her lips against my throat, her own body trembling against mine as she found her release. After, we lay in her bed, the moonlight painting silver stripes across the duvet. Our legs were tangled together. My head was on her chest, and I could hear the steady, strong beat of her heart beneath my ear, a metronome for my newfound peace. Her fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare back, each stroke a silent promise, a wordless poem. I felt known. I felt safe. In the hazy space before sleep, she whispered into my hair, her voice a vibration against my skin. I've never felt like this before. It feels like coming home. And I, who had never had a home to come to, finally understood what the word meant. That night, I dreamed not in images, but in sensations, the weight of her arm across my stomach, the scent of her skin, the profound quiet of a soul at rest. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you don't miss the next one. The memory of that safety made the cold reality of the letter all the more brutal. When Alara came home that evening, her face was alight with a frantic, bewildered excitement. She burst through the door, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide. She'd gotten a call from Maestro Hoffmann himself. The principal cellist in Vienna had a sudden family emergency, a year-long leave of absence. They needed a replacement, and her name had been at the top of the list. It was a miracle, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. She was talking a mile a minute, unpacking this impossible fantasy that had landed in her lap, her hands fluttering like excited birds. And all I could see was her mother's hand, moving the pieces on the chessboard. I stood there, the cream-colored paper hidden in the back pocket of my jeans, a secret burning a hole against my skin. How could I tarnish her joy with my paranoia? How could I say, "This isn't a miracle, it's a purchase. Your mother is buying you away from me"? So I smiled. I hugged her. I told her how incredible it was, how proud I was of her. I let the poison of the letter seep into my own bloodstream instead of hers. That night, as we lay in the same bed where we'd first felt so safe, a new space existed between us. It was the width of the Atlantic Ocean, the length of a year, the depth of a secret I was now keeping. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the emotional whirlwind, her body curled trustingly into mine. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the lie I was living solidify around me like a second skin. Her mother's plan was diabolical because it wasn't a forceful separation, it was a seductive one. She wasn't pulling Alara away. She was luring her with the one thing she couldn't resist, her dream. The weeks that followed were a strange, painful parody of our early days. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the impending departure. Our touches became more desperate, our kisses more frantic, as if we could store the sensation, bottle the feeling, to survive the coming famine. One afternoon, we were on the sofa, a tangle of limbs, and she began to kiss me with a focused intensity that stole my breath. Her hands slipped under my t-shirt, her palms warm and certain on my skin. It wasn't about passion alone, it was about memorization. Her lips traced the line of my jaw, the hollow of my throat, as if committing the topography of my body to memory. I responded in kind, my hands sliding up her thighs, pushing her skirt up around her waist. We made love there in the afternoon sun, a slow, aching, silent communion, our eyes locked, saying everything we couldn't voice. Afterward, she cried softly into my hair, and I held her, my own tears soaking into the cushion beneath us. We spent that entire weekend in a bubble of our own making, leaving the apartment only for food, our bodies speaking a language of loss and love that words could never capture. We explored each other with a new, poignant hunger. I remember kneeling before her as she sat on the edge of the bed, my hands on her knees, parting them slowly. I kissed the inside of her thighs, feeling the tremor that ran through her, before lowering my mouth to the very core of her. I worshipped her with my tongue, learning the rhythms and textures that made her gasp and clutch at the sheets, committing the taste of her, the sounds she made, to a part of my memory I hoped would be indelible. She came apart under my mouth with a broken, beautiful cry, and afterward pulled me up to kiss me, her own taste on my lips a bittersweet sacrament. I helped her pack, folding her sweaters, her sheet music, her life, into 2 large suitcases. Each item placed inside felt like a piece of her I was surrendering. She held up a simple black sweater. "This one still smells like you," she said softly, her voice thick. "From when you wore it that rainy day." She brought it to her face and inhaled, and the gesture was so vulnerable, so full of a love I knew was real, that it took everything in me not to scream the truth. We packed her cello with the care of someone entombing a vital organ, and the finality of the case clicking shut echoed through the apartment. The day she left was a bright, cruel mockery of a day. At the airport, she clung to me, her face buried in my neck, and I could feel the dampness of her tears against my skin. "It's only a year," she whispered, a mantra for both of us. "We can do this. Love wins, right?" I kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that I tried to imprint with every ounce of my soul. I tasted salt and a future that felt like it was crumbling in my hands. "Love wins," I echoed, the words ash in my mouth. I watched her walk through security, a solitary figure growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the mouth of the terminal. The silence she left behind was a physical presence, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I stood there for a long time, alone in a crowd of strangers, the ghost of her mother's perfume haunting me. I drove back to an apartment that was no longer a home, just a collection of rooms filled with the artifacts of a life that had suddenly sailed away without me. Don't forget, every week we share new tales. Subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you're always the first to hear them. The breaking point came 2 months later. It was our anniversary. The one we'd invented, the date of our first kiss under the laundromat sign. I'd spent weeks planning for it. I'd sent her a care package filled with her favorite tea from the little shop down the street, the sketch I'd done of her hands on the cello, and a new, impossibly soft cashmere scarf the color of her eyes. I stayed up late, waiting for her call, my heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. The phone finally rang, the screen glowing with her name. I answered, a ruddy smile on my face. But her voice was distant, formal. She thanked me for the package. There was a pause, the kind of pause that holds entire universes of bad news. "My mother is here," she said, her voice quiet. She showed me something. My blood ran cold. I could picture it perfectly. Her mother, sitting gracefully in a Viennese cafe, sliding a document across the table. A private investigator's report, perhaps. Photos. Lies, or worse, carefully curated truths. "She showed me pictures of you," Alara continued, her voice breaking. "Having coffee with someone. A woman. Last week. She said you've moved on. That you weren't waiting for me." The world tilted. The woman was Lena, a fellow illustrator, a friend. We'd been working on a collaborative project. It was innocent, utterly, completely innocent. But in a photograph, from a certain angle, a shared laugh could look like intimacy. A leaned-in conversation over a sketchbook could look like a secret. Her mother had taken a mundane moment and weaponized it, framing it with poisonous suggestions. I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate jumble. "Alara, no, it's not what you think. That's Lena. You know Lena. We were just working." "She said you'd deny it," Alara whispered, and the defeat in her voice was worse than any anger. "She said you'd have a story ready." I am so far away, I can't. I can't see your eyes. I can't know if you're telling the truth. The trust, the beautiful, unshakable trust that had been the bedrock of us, was shattered. Her mother hadn't just created distance, she had weaponized it. She had turned the 6-hour time difference and the thousands of miles into a void where doubt and lies could fester and grow. Do you really believe I could do that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The silence on the other end of the line was my answer. It was the most profound silence I had ever heard, filled with the sound of everything we were breaking. I think we need to take a break, she said finally, the words formal and hollow. This is all just too hard. She hung up. I was left holding the phone, the dial tone a monotonous scream in the silent, dark apartment. I had lost. Her mother had orchestrated it perfectly. She had used my own life, my own friendships, as the bullet and the distance as the gun. I slid to the floor, the cold hardwood pressing against my cheek, and I wept. I wept for us, for the love that felt like it was being murdered by 1,000 paper cuts, each one bearing her mother's elegant script. I wept until there was nothing left, a hollowed-out shell on the floor of the home we had built together. The silence of the apartment was no longer just empty, it was accusatory. Every object seemed to whisper of failure. The painting on the wall we'd chosen together, the rug we'd saved for months to buy, the dent in the sofa cushion where she always sat, they were all witnesses to my defeat. I felt the 4 walls of our life closing in, becoming a prison of my own making, a monument to a love that had been outmaneuvered by a colder, crueler intelligence. Don't forget, more stories like this are waiting. Subscribe now to Sapphic Tales before we continue. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. The grief was a physical thing, a leaden weight in my chest, a nausea in my throat. The world had lost its color, its sound, its meaning. Giving up felt like the only option left. It would be easier to stop fighting, to let the current of her mother's design carry me away to some numb, gray shore. But then a memory surfaced, fighting its way through the despair. It was from a few months before the letter, a rainy Sunday. We were in the kitchen, and I was trying to teach her how to make my grandmother's pasta, a recipe I guarded like a state secret. She was terrible at it, her hands, so graceful with a bow, clumsy with dough. Flour was everywhere, in her hair, on the tip of her nose. She looked at me, her eyes crinkling with laughter, and said, "I'm a disaster." And I'd kissed the flour from her nose and replied, "You're my disaster." The love in that moment had been so simple, so robust, so utterly devoid of the outside world. I remembered the feel of her flour-dusted hands on my waist, the way she leaned into me, the taste of her lips, faintly of olive oil and basil. That was real. That was us. I remembered another night when I had woken from a nightmare, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Before I could even orient myself, her arms were around me, pulling me into the solid warmth of her body. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just held me, her hand making slow, firm circles on my back until my breathing settled and the terror receded. "I've got you," she had whispered into my hair. "I'll always have you." That was the love we had built. It was a fortress, not a house of cards. I had simply forgotten, in the face of her mother's psychological warfare, how strong its walls were. That love was real. It wasn't the fragile thing her mother had described in the letter. It was in the pasta flour on a Sunday, in the shared silence, in the syncopated rhythm of our hearts beating together in the dark. It was worth fighting for. A cold, clear fury began to burn through the grief. I would not let that woman erase us. I would not let her win by default. If this was a war, then it was time to stop being a casualty and start being a soldier. I got up from the floor. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp, focused for the first time in months. I went to my desk, littered with sketches and half-finished projects. I pulled out a fresh, large sheet of watercolor paper. I didn't reach for a pencil. I reached for my inks, my brushes, the most vibrant colors I owned. I wouldn't write a letter. I would paint one. I would create a map back to me, back to us. I painted our story. I started with 2 hands, one tracing the lifeline on the other's palm, the ink a bold, defiant blue. I painted the rain-streaked neon of the laundromat, the silver moonlight on a shared bed, the curve of a cello against a shoulder, the tangle of our limbs on the sofa. I painted the small, sacred moments, the shared mug of coffee in the morning, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the feel of her head on my chest. I painted our home, not as a place, but as a feeling, the feeling of her jasmine scent on my pillows, the warmth of her body next to mine, the safety of her heartbeat under my ear. I painted the furious, joyful mess of our kitchen on that flower-dusted Sunday. I painted the quiet safety of her arms in the middle of the night. I painted it all, not as separate scenes, but as one flowing, interconnected whole, a universe contained within the borders of the paper, a universe that belonged only to us. I painted for 2 days straight, stopping only for water and fitful bursts of sleep. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I poured every ounce of my love, my fear, my fury, and my hope onto that single, expansive sheet of paper. It was a testament, a declaration, a battle cry in pigment and water. When it was finished, it was messy and vibrant and overflowing with a truth that no private investigator's photo could ever capture. I rolled it carefully, tied it with a simple blue ribbon, and shipped it to her in Vienna. No return address, no note, just the art, just our love, rendered in my own hand. Then I waited. The wait was an agony. A week passed, then another. The silence was worse than the fight, a void where all hope could potentially die. I tortured myself with visions of her mother intercepting the package, of it sitting unopened in a trash bin, of Alara looking at it with cold, disillusioned eyes, seeing not our love, but a desperate, last-ditch attempt. I had thrown my heart across an ocean, and now there was only silence. I tried to go back to my life. I worked on illustrations. I met Lena for coffee. I walked through the city, but everything was muted, seen through a gray filter. The apartment was still a tomb. I started to believe that my painting had been a final, foolish gesture, the last spasm of a dying thing. I began the painful process of mentally packing her things away, of trying to imagine a life in this space that was just mine. It felt like carving out a part of my own soul with a spoon. The silence was a living thing, and it was winning. If it kept you hooked, subscribe now to Sapphic Tales so you never miss the next. It was a Tuesday afternoon, overcast and cold. I was in the kitchen, listlessly making tea, when I heard a key in the lock. My heart stopped. No one had a key except for me, and the door opened. She stood there, framed in the doorway, a suitcase at her feet. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But her eyes were the same twilight blue-gray that had found me in a crowd a lifetime ago. They were clear, and they were fixed on me. We stood frozen, 10 feet apart, the silence stretching between us, thick and charged. I could see the journey on her, the miles, the tears, the conflict. She let her suitcase fall with a thud. "I got your painting," she said, her voice raw, scraped clean of all pretense. I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. "My mother was there when it arrived," she continued, taking a slow step into the apartment, her eyes never leaving mine. "She told me not to open it. She said it was just more manipulation. A pretty picture to hide the ugly truth." Another step. The space between us halved. I almost listened to her. I was so tired. It's so easy to be told what to feel, who to be. Her voice broke. But I looked at that tube, and I remembered the feel of your hand, the real one, not the one in a picture. I remembered the taste of rain. I remembered what it felt like to be home. She was standing right in front of me now. I could see the flecks of silver in her blue-gray eyes, could smell the faint, familiar scent of jasmine beneath the travel and fatigue. I opened it, she whispered, and I saw us. I saw the truth. Not her truth. Not the truth in some staged photograph. Our truth. A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. I reached out, my hand trembling, and caught it with my thumb. The contact was an electric shock, a circuit completing after a long, dark winter. I left, she said, the words simple and final. I left the orchestra. I left Vienna. I left my mother in that cafe, still talking, still planning. I walked out, and I got on a plane, and I came home. To you. Her hands came up to frame my face, her touch as sure as it had been that first night in the rain. You are not a distraction, she said, her voice fierce now, blazing with a certainty that scorched away all the doubt, all the fear. You are my home, and I choose you. I will always choose you. And then she kissed me. It was not like our first kiss, all rain and frantic discovery. It was not like any kiss we had ever shared. This kiss was a homecoming. It was a reclamation. It was a battle one. It tasted of salt tears and a long journey of truth and unwavering choice. It was deep and slow and poured a lifetime of promise into my soul. I kissed her back, my hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between us, no distance, no mother, no lies, only this, only us, only the profound, shuddering relief of a love that had, against all odds, found its way back to itself. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We sank to the floor right there in the kitchen, a tangle of limbs and desperate, reverent hands. We were mapping each other again, relearning the familiar geography of skin and bone and heartbeat. It was frantic and tender, a conversation of touch that spoke of loss and fear and a ferocious, triumphant return. Her hands found their way under my shirt, her palms warm against the small of my back, tracing the curve of my spine with a familiarity that made me whimper. Right there, I breathed into her neck, and her touch softened, solidified, holding me together as I felt myself coming apart. We moved together in the dim afternoon light, a syncopated rhythm of breath and sigh, of whispered names and shuddering release, until the world narrowed to the point where our bodies met, until we peaked in a shared, silent cry that was less about pleasure and more about the sheer, undeniable proof of existence, of presence of us. Afterward, we lay on the hard floor, wrapped in each other, our limbs entwined, our hearts hammering against each other's ribs, slowly settling into a synchronized beat. The storm had passed. The chaos her mother had sown had been weathered, and in its wake, we had found a connection deeper and more resilient than ever before. She nuzzled into my neck, her breath warm on my skin. It feels safe, she whispered. It finally feels safe again. And it did. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that was left was the solid, unwavering truth of her body in my arms, her choice echoing in the quiet room. The external battle might not have been over, but the war for our souls had been won. Right here on the cold kitchen floor, love had not just survived, it had evolved. It had roots now, deep and strong, capable of withstanding any storm. Later, in the soft dark of our bedroom, we made love again. This time, it was different. There was no desperation, only a deep, swelling joy. We took our time, rediscovering every curve, every sigh, every secret place that belonged only to us. I kissed the inside of her wrists, the delicate skin behind her knees, the pulse at the base of her throat. She arched beneath me, her body a symphony of responses I conducted with my lips and hands. When I finally slid inside her, it was with a sense of rightness that was almost spiritual. We moved together in a slow, undulating rhythm, our eyes locked, sharing smiles as well as gasps. This was a celebration. This was a vow. As we climbed together towards that final, breathtaking peak, I saw my own overwhelming joy reflected in her eyes. We fell over the edge as one, our cries mingling, our bodies fused, the last fragments of the past year dissolving in the heat between us. We lay in the aftermath, sticky and sated and utterly complete. Her head was on my chest, her leg thrown over mine, a possessive, comforting weight. I ran my fingers through her hair, and she sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment. "I'm never leaving again," she murmured into my skin. "No more orchestras. No more mothers. Just this. Just us." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar jasmine scent. "Just us," I agreed. And for the first time in a year, I believed it without a single shadow of a doubt. We spent the next week in a blissful, isolated cocoon. We barely left the apartment, existing in a timeless space of tangled sheets, shared meals, and long, whispered conversations in the dark. We talked about everything that had happened, not with anger, but with a sense of shared survival. She told me about the subtle pressure her mother had applied in Vienna, the constant, genteel suggestions that a life with me was a small life, a limited one. I told her about the corrosive power of the letter, how it had fed my deepest insecurities. Sharing these wounds under the safe cover of darkness, with her body curled against mine, felt like lancing a poison. We were healing each other, not with grand gestures, but with the simple, powerful medicine of presence and touch. We never spoke of her mother again. There was no need. Ilara's choice, her defiant journey across an ocean, was the only statement that mattered. She found a new position with a local chamber orchestra, one that valued her brilliance without demanding her soul. Our life rebuilt itself, not as it was before, but stronger, more intentional. The shadow of the letter was gone, banished by the vibrant, undeniable truth we had fought for. We developed new rituals. Sunday mornings were for making pasta, flour inevitably dusting every surface, our laughter echoing in the kitchen. Wednesday nights were for listening to her new orchestra rehearse, me sitting in the back of the hall, sketching the musicians, but always, always, my eyes drifting back to her, to the fierce concentration on her face, the graceful arc of her bow arm. I saw the music in her body before I heard it in the air. Sometimes, on a quiet evening when I'm sketching and she's practicing, her cello notes weaving through the apartment like golden thread, our eyes will meet. And in that glance, I see it all, the rain, the distance, the pain, and the glorious, hard-won return. I see the memory of a cream-colored letter that tried to break us, and the memory of a painting that brought us home. I see a love that was tested in fire and emerged, not scarred, but tempered, unbreakable. She will set her bow down, cross the room, and kiss me, a soft, lingering kiss that tastes of the present, of a future we built ourselves. And I know, with a certainty that feels as solid as the earth beneath my feet, that love didn't just win. It chose to stay. If this story found a home in your heart, subscribe to Sapphic Tales. Our story is done, but so many others are just beginning.